So we've got two hot topics for you today. The first is the difference between temporary and transitory, because it seems like a lot of you are getting this confused. And the second is the Bank of Canada is now saying, don't necessarily expect interest rates to start going up in Q2. There's a lot more to it than just inflation. The definitive guide on how to manage your credit. Product, penalty, price, in that order. It's never been more important to get your mortgage right. Okay, so let's get into it. There's a whole bunch of information that's going to be coming at you today. First of all, I want to talk about the difference between transitory and temporary inflation, because this seems to be getting confused. And then we're going to talk about the Bank of Canada and their recent remarks and what it may mean for interest rates going forward. It has a lot to do with employment and hitting specific outcomes with respect to the output gap. And now they're basically saying, well, they're watching inflation, that the employment market is clouding exactly when you may see future rate increases. So hedging a little bit off of that conversation that they've been having in the media the last few weeks. But before we get into it, do me that favor, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, and please hit that like button so more people like you can see this video. And don't forget about our race to 25,000 subscribers, where when we hit 25,000 subscribers, we are going to give away $5,000 to one lucky winner to do whatever they like with. Thank you to the almost 19,000 of you. Yes, 19,000 of you who have already subscribed. If you haven't subscribed, it's free, it's easy, it's definitely worth it. Go ahead, click that subscribe button. And if you want to join us in our down payment challenge, for those of you who are in the process of saving your down payment and you want to learn how to save an extra $5,000 in 30 days, you can go to downpaymentchallenge.ca. That starts on the 22nd of November. Hit up that link so you can reduce the amount of time it takes you to save your down payment for that future house that's coming for you probably in 2022. So let's get into it. Let's first of all talk temporary versus transitory inflation, because this is a term that people are getting confused. We see it in the comments. They go, this inflation, it is definitely not transitory. The Bank of Canada is wrong. The Federal Reserve is wrong. Everybody is wrong. It's not transitory. And I think what's happening here is there's a little bit of confusion about the terms. So let's talk about what temporary inflation would look like, first of all, because this is what people are saying when they are saying transitory. They're interchanging the word temporary, and they're believing that the inflation that we're seeing is not transitory, and really what they're saying is it's not temporary, and that's true. The increases in prices are not temporary. They're not going to go back down unless we hit a deflationary period. And basically what temporary inflation means is when you see a spike in the prices of goods and then you eventually see them come back down. And that's what everybody is kind of assuming that the word transitory means. And that isn't what it means, obviously. What transitory means, and just like temporary, it means non-permanent. That's the definition of both transitory and temporary in the normal world of definitions of things. It's non-permanent. But what transitory means in the world of economics is it means forces on inflation that are temporary. And this is absolutely true of what's going on right now. There are forces acting on inflation that are temporary. The pandemic was temporary. Therefore, it is transitory, the effect it is having on inflation. The supply chain issues are temporary. Therefore, the effects that they are having on inflation is transitory. The change in demand for housing because of lower interest rates is temporary. Therefore, the transitory effect on housing prices is that they're going up. So you got to think of it this way. Temporary means it'll go up and it'll come back down. And a lot of the effects that are happening on the economy are temporary, but the effects that they're having on inflation are transitory, because while the effects themselves may be temporary, like supply, like changes in housing demand and so on and so forth, the actual effect on inflation is going to remain, and prices are going to remain elevated. And eventually inflation will go down, but inflation will be basically priced off the new prices of things, not the previous prices of things. So for example, just to round this out, deflation in the times of the pandemic was temporary. Prices went down, oil prices went to zero, gas prices went to 49 cents. Prices for a lot of other goods and services, travel, went down substantially, and then they eventually came back up. That was temporary. If they went down and they stayed down permanently, that would have been transitory. So that's the main difference here. Temporary versus transitory. You have to understand that the effects of these things that are happening in the economy are transitory. They are correct in saying they are transitory, and they will eventually work themselves out. That doesn't mean that prices are going to go back down. They're probably going to stay level, but you have to understand the difference between those two terms, especially when you're having the conversations about it and just assuming that inflation is here to stay, because I'll tell you what, the prices are here to stay. The growth rate of inflation hopefully is not. So that's the first thing. The second thing, and let's get into the screen here and the conversation that was had by by Lawrence Chambray, the Deputy Governor of the Bank of Canada, with the Canadian Association for Business Economics today. I'm going to show you basically the conversation that he had. The actual transcript of what he was talking about is entirely available on the Bank of Canada website. He talks about two things here. Basically, he talks about the output gap and that being the determinant of when you're going to see them start to increase interest rates. So when the economy is at basically full capacity again. But then he also talks about the changing dynamics of the labor market affecting the output gap, and therefore the changing labor issues are going to have an impact on when we see interest rates increase. And here's the thing is we're seeing different labor markets come back to full capacity, but we're also seeing different labor markets that haven't come back to full capacity. And what they're talking about here with respect to the labor markets is, and interest rates eventually increasing, is they're talking about fair and even distribution of the recovery. So what they're basically implying is that they may allow inflation to run hot for a little bit longer because of the fact that the recovery hasn't necessarily been fair for all. And what they're hinting at and what they're moving towards is more of a dual mandate. Now, I don't think they're going to go completely do a dual mandate where they look at inflation and at labor, but the labor issues are definitely being considered with respect to when they're going to increase interest rates. And if the labor issues don't get sorted out, you can basically assume that they're going to keep interest rates lower for longer because they need that recovery and employment. Just because there is more employment right now than there was pre-pandemic, there's more employment, there's more people working, it doesn't mean that unemployment numbers aren't higher, because there's also a lot of people who were working who still aren't. And unemployment is actually higher than it was pre-pandemic. So, you've got this issue of labor surrounding the whole job market and the output gap and so on and so forth. And what's really interesting, if you go and you take a look at the BNN Bloomberg article from today with respect to this speech, Bank of Canada sees labor market uncertainty clouding the path. And you go through and you read this article. It turns out that there was a question during the question and answer period where somebody asked about the timing with respect to when interest rates would rise. And what the Deputy Governor of the Bank of Canada said is, just because we moved the time frame up to Q2 or April of 2022 doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to see us increase interest rates in the second quarter. What he's basically saying is, if we don't see employment come back to full capacity, you may not actually see it until the second half of next year. So here's what they're being really clear about. And this goes back to the article yesterday that the Governor of the Bank of Canada, Tiff Macklem, penned in the Financial Times, the opinion piece, where he said they're watching outcomes, not timelines. So they're looking for full capacity, basically in employment and in the economy. And really what they're getting real clear about is that they're going to look for specific outcomes. And the outcomes are simply this: full recovery in both employment and in the capacity of the economy to continue to grow. So, that doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to be waiting until the end of Q3 next year to see interest rates rise. It also doesn't mean that we couldn't see that timeline moved up to Q1. But what it does mean is that they're really clear about what the outcomes are for an interest rate increase, which is really awesome because, like I said in yesterday's video, the Bank of Canada and the Federal Reserve both did a horrible job coming out of the 2010 financial crisis with regards to messaging rate increases. They introduced rate increases really quickly and without notice, and it had a pretty negative effect on the economy for a pretty significant amount of time. So I'm glad that they're being clear about this. For those of you who are in a variable rate mortgage, I still don't think it's the right time to lock in. Obviously, 5-year fixed rates have gone up to about 2.5% to 2.7%. If the Bank of Canada starts raising interest rates, they're probably going to remain at that level. Fixed rates will be at that level when they start increasing interest rates. So you might as well still ride out your lower interest rates and see exactly what happens in the economy. Because if we don't get that labor market going and we don't get back to full capacity, we may not actually be seeing huge amounts of interest rate increases next year. That's not to say that we won't. Let me be clear about that. But what's important here is that we watch the outcomes that the Bank of Canada is looking for. And when we get close to those outcomes, then we can start making decisions about locking in. But for now, it's a wait and see approach, unless you're having trouble sleeping at night. And if you are, go ahead, lock in your interest rate, but you're going to be leaving some money on the table. So if you found this video useful, do me that favor, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell. Please hit that like button so more people like you can see this video. Don't forget about a race to 25,000 subscribers. And we'll see you on the very next one. Cheers.